Hello, everyone. My name is Robin Budish. I'm the Director of Transit Choices. Welcome to our monthly Transit Choices meeting. It is a pleasure to have you join us. We have two very relevant and informative presentations for you this morning. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our first presenter, David Zaidain. He is the Chief of Transit-Oriented Development with the Maryland Department of Transportation. David's presentation is titled MDOT's Transit-Oriented Development Program, and the synopsis is as follows. With transit-oriented development as a major Moore-Miller administration priority, MDOT is advancing multiple initiatives to lead and support TOD throughout the state. His presentation will give a high-level overview of these initiatives and associated partnerships that are driving success. And his presentation will also include an overview of the Transit and Housing Opportunity Act passed by the General Assembly this past session. Welcome, David. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Robin. And I believe Alex should have joined and she can drive the presentation. Can you see her?
Yes, as soon as you give me screen control, I'll start sharing.
Yes, I am making her a co-host as we speak. Yes.
Well, thank you.
You're good to go.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for bearing with me on the technical side here. I got scheduled to do a walkthrough of the light rail modernization program with MDOT leadership. So I'm doing this from the parking lot of the Cromwell Maintenance Facility in Anne Arundel County. But it's something kind of relevant to what we're talking about here for sure. So again, I'm David Zaidain, Chief of Transit-Oriented Development for MDOT. I run the Office of Real Estate and Economic Development. One of our key team members, Alex Wolinskas, is on the call driving the deck. And we greatly appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. So, when it comes to TOD, I'm going to kind of generally assume everybody knows what we're talking about, but what it is, just to reiterate, is dense mixed-use development built around transit to help drive ridership, provide access, and really present that return on transit investments. It's a huge priority for the Moore-Miller administration. It's a huge opportunity for the state. And it's something that we're very focused on. Beyond the transit aspect of it, the opportunity is to help use TOD as a tool for solving the state's, or helping solve some of the state's housing and economic development challenges. And what the opportunity is really developing land for this use. And we have a huge amount of opportunity to realize. The state has over 300 acres of land next to our high capacity transit that is used a lot of it is used as you see in this photo here as an empty parking lot. I'm actually sitting in one here at Cromwell. This land it's not generating ridership. It's not supporting the maximum use of transit. It's also not generating economic development and housing. So we're very, very focused on getting this land to market and helping realize TOD. But we're also looking at things beyond that, which I'll talk about. We have kind of two signature initiatives that I'll be talking about today. One is the Penn Line TOD strategy, and the other is the Baltimore Regional TOD strategy. Both of them, as I said, provide immense opportunity for housing and economic development. We also support WMATA in the DC region in their TOD efforts. WMATA has 26 stations in Maryland. They have a much more advanced joint development program. But there is still a lot of opportunity to be realized there along the Blue Line corridor and other places. So we work very closely with them and advancing TOD in that area. Next slide. Okay, so to talk about some specific initiatives and activities, Robin had mentioned the recent legislation, which is the Transit and Housing Opportunity Act. Kind of wanted to start off with that. It does reflect Governor Moore's administration's kind of laser focus on TOD, which has been ramping up over the last couple of years. In 2024, TOD was referenced specifically in the Maryland State Plan as a tool to solve housing and economic development. Following that, there was an executive order from the governor kind of laying out some support for doing TOD and making sure that affordable housing is a priority, which it always is. And then after that, in the last legislative session, the governor introduced the Transit and Housing Opportunity Act, Personally, he actually introduced it in both the House and the Senate and really put his political weight behind that bill, which really focuses on barriers to TOD and more specifically land use and economic development, which I'll talk a little bit more about. The other important bill that was passed was the Housing Certainty Act, which I think is a statewide bill, not specifically focused on transit adjacent sites, but it does provide some benefit in helping provide some certainty to development. It kind of rationalizes when impact fees can be levied. It talks about vesting. So I think that type of bill and other housing pieces are really helpful to TOD specifically. Next slide. So to talk about the Maryland Transit and Housing Opportunity Act, it really takes on barriers to TOD in two realms. One is land use, and then the other piece is from the economic side of it. From the land use perspective, it essentially exempts MDOT or state-owned land adjacent to transit, high-capacity transit, from zoning. So legally, when we develop a site for private development, for tax generating development, it is typically subject to zoning. Under this bill, MDOT can kind of control its own destiny from a land use perspective for sites that are adjacent to high capacity transit. That site must be developed under a development plan that is approved by the MDOT secretary and is coordinated with the local jurisdiction. We're working through what that means from a policy standpoint and process standpoint now, but it does give us a little bit more control over very large pieces of land that could be developed for TOD next to our high capacity transit systems. The bill also makes mixed use development as a matter of right next to high capacity transit. And it also preempts the ability to do parking minimums next to high capacity transit. This has been kind of a nationwide dialogue about the overbuilding of parking because of zoning regulations and how that impacts transit accessible sites. Under this bill, there now cannot be parking minimums required. There is a kind of a what was called a relief valve added to this, where if a local jurisdiction really wants that parking minimums, they can submit a parking study to MDOT, and if it still supports transit adjacent development, then it can be relieved. But that's kind of by the bar of that aspect. The second piece is the economic development aspect, and in here, what the bill does is it says if a site becomes TOD designated, and I'll talk about our TOD designations in a little more detail later in the deck, it also becomes an enterprise zone. We think this is an important tool. Enterprise zones help support commercial and job generating development, and it can help spur the type of development that we want. It also gives priority to Medco's Strategic Infrastructure Fund, which we're working with Medco on in terms of how that fund is deployed. So that's really the breadth of the bill. It goes into effect October 1. We're responsible for implementing it, so we're in the process of developing policies to support the provisions of this bill. Next slide. I think it's important to talk about some other aspects quickly. We have a very strategic partnership with DHCD. Secretary Day is a great proponent of transit-oriented development and developing housing near transit. We signed an MOU with DHCD that basically said, we're going to work together to realize TOD and make sure there's a good component of affordable housing. The MOU also codifies that DHCD will prioritize its funding, particularly LIHTC or low-income housing tax credits, for MDOT projects. And this has been a real kind of game changer in a way. Those credits and those programs are meaningful to development, and it's really helped garner a lot of interest from the development community in developing our site. So we're grateful to DHCD and their partnership, and we continue to build on that. Next slide. Okay, so to talk about a couple of our bigger initiatives, we have a lot of work happening, so I'm going to kind of highlight some of the bigger pieces. We released the Baltimore Regional TOD strategy in April of this year. We hosted a roundtable with local public sector, private sector, institutional sector leaders headed by the governor to talk about the importance of TOD in the Baltimore region. And one of the reasons why we're so focused on the Baltimore region in this aspect is That's where we have the bulk of our state transit assets. There are historic levels of investment going into the metro and the light rail. We also own a lot of land. We have over 160 acres of developable land in that area. There's also other opportunities for development outside of the land we own. So it's just such an important piece to focus on. And we needed strategic alignment with our jurisdictional partners to be able to realize this. There oftentimes is a kind of a misalignment or a confusion of what the state can do versus what the local jurisdiction can do. I always joke that 8 months out of the year, I'm told TOD is a state priority, but then 4 months out of the year during the General Assembly session, TOD is a local jurisdiction priority or prerogative. The answer is always in the middle, right? It should be a priority and a partnership amongst both actors. And we wanted to use this strategy as a way to organize that. Go to the next slide. And the bigger piece of that there are historic levels of investment going into the transit in the Baltimore region, and I find this to be very exciting. There's over $500 million that have gone into and continue to go into the new metro cars. If you haven't ridden them yet, they're great. And then also the levels of investment going into the light rail modernization, which is the subject of my tour today. This is going to kind of re-energize and revitalize the transit in Baltimore. And that's very exciting. And it's a huge opportunity. But to really realize the investment and make good on these dollars, we need to be able to build around these systems so that people use it. There's destinations, that it's really working as hard as it can be for the citizens and the economy of the Baltimore region. So very excited about this aspect, and I'm happy to talk about West Baltimore as we get toward the ends of the station. I just saw that comment. Next slide. So in terms of the different aspects of the analysis, and this was more about organizing the different approaches. Where the state owns land, we're able to take that to market through a program called joint development. We still need the jurisdictional partners with us. And there are different, the jurisdictional partners, the local jurisdictions have more financial tools than the state does. So we always need them at the table, and we need them there for a host of reasons. But when we own land, we're able to take that to market. When there isn't publicly owned land, the challenge is getting the market to that site. So again, same partnerships, similar goals, but different routes to get there. And that was one of the key opportunities for doing the Baltimore Regional TOD strategy. Next slide. Alex, did you freeze up? There we go. So, and to codify a little bit more about the opportunity in the region, again, I mentioned the opportunity for developing state-owned land, tremendous opportunity for housing and economic development. But we also looked at outside of the state ownership, what are the development opportunities? Sites that may be underdeveloped, maybe vacant. We didn't really look at redevelopment of single family areas. It was more about what are the development opportunities immediately adjacent to transit. And that opportunity is immense with some of the numbers that you see here. So in our view, if we can really catalyze using state-owned land for TOD, we think we can catalyze this broader opportunity for the region and really get the market to those sites. Next slide. One of the, we don't like to just put out plans for plans. We want to make sure that this translates into direct action. So when we released the Baltimore Regional TOD strategy, we also immediately released the Rogers Avenue Metro Station Joint Development Solicitation. It was one of the priority sites that we identified in that strategy. We have about a 9-acre parcel on the north parcel at the site that is kind of development ready. There's not a lot of infrastructure needs. And so we put that out to market. We've had a great response from the development community. We just shortlisted 4 development teams that have now moved on to the RFP stage, and we'll look forward to announcing that development partner later in the year. Next slide. Okay, so to talk about the Mark Penline strategy, this was a strategy that we did kind of when we first came in 2023. The Mark Penline is a really core strategic asset that connects the DC and the Baltimore economic region. There are longer term plans to extend service to Northern Virginia and to Delaware. It's part of the Northeast Corridor, which is the heaviest trafficked, rail trafficked corridor in North America. So tremendous opportunity here for transit-oriented development and generating MARC ridership and connecting those opportunities. We have a preponderance of land, almost 150 acres of state-owned land that's available for development, not to mention the city-owned or local jurisdiction-owned land that is an opportunity for development. And so we looked at this strategy in partnership with our jurisdictions and said, how do we bring TOD to the Penn Line corridor? And this also included West Baltimore as well. Next slide. And the opportunity is immense. We can get almost 800 million in economic development. We can get a significant new MARC ridership. And so the two priority sites that came out of that, something that we can take to market that we own, is Odenton and Bowie State. And so we've moved forward with getting a development partner and advancing TOD at those sites. And we'll continue working on the other sites as we advance those projects. Next slide. So to talk about Odenton, we released an RFP about a year and a half ago, had great response from the market. Last year, we selected Homes for America and Questar, which was a team of developers. Questar is based in Baltimore. Homes for America is a nonprofit housing firm. And, we see this as a great opportunity to extend the Odenton Town Center development and really create an important center at the Odenton MARC station. This is also close to, one of the biggest employers in the state, the DoD facility. And so we think this is an important economic driver for the state and Anne Arundel County. Next slide. And the way these work, we put out these renderings initially just to try to show the possibilities. And as we advance these projects with our development teams, we're able to drill into the specifics. And so that's how we're advancing with Odenton. These things, these projects do take time as we evolve and get them going. But as you can see here, you can kind of see how it's all coming together. We're going to have a decent chunk of market rate housing, a decent chunk of affordable housing. It's the intention to tap into DHCD's program to fund that. You'll see the new commuter parking garage, which is going to break ground next year. That's being funded by the county. And again, this reflects that partnership angle. The county has enacted a TIF here that is funding some, the infrastructure. MDOT is coming in and developing the land, and DHCD is going to help provide funding. This is all done in partnership, and this is a great example of how that can work. So we're very excited about the advancement of this project. Next slide. So Bowie State was another priority effort coming out of the Penn Line strategy. We have a kind of a three-way partnership here. We signed an MOU with Prince George's County and Bowie State University to help coordinate the development efforts. We have about a 5-acre site right next to the MARC station. The county owns 93 acres around our land, so they have an even bigger chunk of opportunity. And it's really critical that this is all coordinated and developed in a succinct way. And we issued our RFP last year for a development partner, and we just awarded that with a press event last week. We awarded our site to Mosaic Development, which does a lot of public-private partnerships, and the county has awarded their developer as well to a JV from Prince George's County. So we have our development partners in place, and we're going to start moving forward with coordinating the different development aspects. There's a lot of challenges here, like the sites don't have water or sewer. There's a lot of connectivity issues we need to solve. So, we've got a lot of work to do, but we have our development partners in place, and we look forward to advancing that work. Next slide. To talk a little bit about some other projects, State Center, which might be of interest to a lot of the folks on the call. There's a very long history here to the efforts, but there was a settlement to the lawsuit over a year ago, and it's kind of reopened the opportunity to develop this, and it's really an important transit-oriented development site in the center of Baltimore City. It's got its own metro with the State Center Metro. There's a cultural center, light rail There's numerous bus lines that serve this site. It's a 26-acre site that really provides that big opportunity for something significant from a TOD standpoint. So the site is owned by Department of General Services, DGS. We are working with them to understand what are the opportunities and the constraints here. Like this project, like all of our projects, we want to do our due diligence and make sure that that we are in alignment before we even go out to market and get a development partner. We're doing that now. One of the big issues is, can the buildings be reused? I think that's going to be a challenge given the condition of the buildings, but we're nailing that down. And there's a lot of different requirements that we need to understand for the site. But we're hoping to get this to market next year. There will be another. We had a public meeting about this about a month and a half ago. There'll be another one in the fall, and we look forward to moving this project forward. Next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our state TOD designation program, because this has been a longstanding program in the state for having the state support TOD, and we've kind of realigned it in the last couple of years. And I think what's exciting about this program is this has nothing to do with land ownership. It's more about, we want to be supportive about TOD wherever it's happening, whoever is leading it. So we have geared this to say, if you are a local jurisdiction that really wants TOD, Frederick County or whatever that may be, and you have done your due diligence in terms of getting your land use right, getting the financial tools in place, we want to be there to support you. So we've turned this designation program into more of a support mechanism. Jurisdictions can apply to us. We review their application. The Sustainable Growth Subcabinet can act on it, and then you become a TOD designated site. What does that mean? So we're in the process of standing up a host of tools to support those designations. One of the biggest of which is the TOD Capital Grant Program. And I think, Alex, that's the next slide. You want to go to that? Yeah, so the TOD Capital Grant Program and Revolving Loan Fund was approved by the legislature in 2023. We've been working to stand this up. And basically what this is if you are a jurisdiction that wants to advance public infrastructure or any type of project within a TOD designated area, you can apply to us for a capital grant, and we'll review it and say, is this something that really advances TOD, and then help provide funding to move that forward. We've issued about $1.5 million worth of grants over the last year, 2 for Baltimore City. We're supporting a project in North Bethesda. We're supporting Odenton with Anne Arundel County. So we're really using this as a tool to leverage those designations to really get jurisdictions and the state and everybody in alignment to advance TOD. And one of the other changes that I mentioned was that the Sustainable Growth Subcabinet approves these designations, which means you have other state agencies, DHCD, Commerce, Planning, all at the table to say, okay, we want to be able to help this development happen. And so we've been working to advance that, and we'll be adding more tools to it as we move forward. Next, I think that's it. So that's an overview of a lot of work that we have going on. I'm happy to dive in with any questions, and appreciate the chance to talk to everybody today.
Thank you, David. If you have a question or comment, you can either raise your hand or put your comment in the chat. Jonathan.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Robin, and thanks, Jimmy, as always, for putting this on, and thanks, David, for the presentation. Super excited to hear about the emphasis on TOD in the Moore administration. I'm with the Edmondson Community Organization and Hub West Baltimore Community Development Corporation, which is the community organization and development organization representing Midtown Edmondson and the West Baltimore Mark Station area. The West Baltimore Mark Station area is massive potential for the Midtown Edmondson revitalization area. We are super interested in it. We've actually written a master plan that includes a lot of TOD things that is now community approved. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the West Baltimore Mark Station and a lot of time planning it the last 2.5 years. We didn't really hear any talk about it here. in this presentation, and that sort of corresponds to what we saw in the Penn Line study and some of the other things that have been brought online by the state regarding the TOD areas. The questions are really simple. Firstly, we know there's a study, there's been money that's been allocated for a planning study for the West Baltimore MARC station. First of all, can you confirm that that's been awarded? We've heard that it's been awarded to WSP. Can you confirm that? Secondly, can you talk about the timing of that planning study and when we're expected to begin or become a part of it, that sort of thing? And the third thing is, can you talk about the process for selecting if WSP has been selected or some other entity has been selected, can you talk about the process that brought about that selection and whether and how community and other organizations that have been doing planning there have been involved in the vetting of that selection as well as what's going forward? Thanks, David.
Sure, I'm happy to, and I can only answer those questions the best way I can. MTA is leading that planning study. There is an FTA planning grant for West Baltimore, and I honestly I think that there has been some of evolution of the scope to an extent. But just to be frank, my office isn't leading that, but I'm happy to connect you with the folks at MTA who are. But I think there was some expectation from the MTA side that given the MARC station reconstruction, given the Red Line efforts, given the West Baltimore United, they wanted to be in the lead of that project. So again, I can only answer that question the best way I can, but I'm happy to connect you with the folks at MTA who are leading that effort.
That would be great. Can you confirm whether someone's been chosen to lead that and whether
I do
that's
believe
WSP?
I do believe it's WSP. Yeah,
Okay.
that is my understanding.
Has the study started? I mean, have they started work?
I think they've started doing some initial analysis, but my understanding is that the scope has changed in various forms from what MTA was doing. But again, I'm happy to connect you with whoever if you want to send me a note, and I can connect you to the folks at MTA who are leading that effort.
That would be great. We'd also love to connect with you if that's possible and huddle
Sure.
at some point. So I'll put that in the note as well. Thanks,
Sure.
David.
Yeah, no problem.
We have a comment in the chat from Greg. Bicycles can hugely expand the catchment area of a transit station. The Dutch have done a superb job of maximizing this interface. Do the TOD plans address bicycle access and parking?
100%. So what we do before we take a site to market, and I'm going to speak to this from a joint development aspect, is we do an initial analysis, and we did this at Rogers Avenue. We've done this at all of our sites before we go to market, and we say, okay, what's the development capacity? What's the parking aspect from a transit perspective? Because some of these sites, particularly on the commuter lines, still need some level of transit parking. And then we say, okay, what's the condition of the surrounding streets? Is there micro mobility? Is there connectivity? We work on that with our jurisdictional partners because in Baltimore City, the city owns the streets as an example, so we want to have them at the table. But we identify what are all those improvements that we need, to make sure that these sites are thoroughly connected, and then we get some costs. We understand what those things may be, and then as we get the development teams in, we work with them to understand, like, okay, how do we fund these things? And the capital grant is a great example. One of the capital grants that we awarded is looking at Wabash Avenue, which connects Rogers and Reisterstown. So we're working with the city there and improving micromobility. I do want to note that it's not the intent to put all of this on the developer. That's not a great way to get the type of development we want. We want to work in partnership with them. We need public dollars just as much as we need private dollars. But we do identify that, and we consider that as a key priority, and we do all of that work up front before we even get a development partner. So hopefully that answers the question, but it is a major priority. Also, just one other piece is our complete streets, MDOT's complete streets policy is run out of TSO. So our colleagues in the Secretary's office oversee the MDOT active mobility program, and they are in lockstep with us as we advance TOD. So something we talk about every day, and it's an important thing to us.
Thank you. Klaus has a comment. You've used a few times the term to bring the market to the site It's an interesting statement in several Baltimore areas where the market is really weak. Can you explain how the market will be activated beyond the capital grant program?
Big question for sure, Klaus. That's for sure, and that's the challenge, right? I mean, we're trying to do real estate development, and obviously that is a factor of many big economic drivers, right? So, but I will say that developing incentives is really critical. So, the DHCD programs, prioritizing them, I think is really meaningful. Also, one of the aspects is our land values. We're able to take to use our land value as a reinvestment in the project and not just telling developers, hey, you need to make big lease payments to us. So we're really trying to make these sites as attractive as we can. Also, with the Baltimore Regional TOD strategy, we have started and are continuing a conversation with the institutional community, Johns Hopkins, all of these great institutional anchors that we have in Baltimore, to really start thinking about how they could maybe locate at TOD sites as a driver. That's also a conversation at State Center. So we're doing everything we can to make these as attractive to development. But just like everything else, we are beholden to bigger economic factors in the region. I think there's a lot of efforts to really get economic development and real estate development going in the Baltimore region. But we're trying to put in as many incentives and drivers as we can to realize the type of development that we want.
Thank you. David, one last question, because we know you've got a very busy day and we are going to be moving to our second presentation. But my question is this: how can transit advocacy organizations like Transit Choices best partner, with MDOT, local governments, and developers to help advance transit-oriented development in Maryland?
That's another great question. I think there's I think, again, there are different things that the state can do. There's different things that the local jurisdictions can do. I will say that you have a very strong partner and driver with Governor Moore in the state in terms of realizing this. The local jurisdiction context is a little bit different. I think I'm sure many of you on the phone have heard about the famous project at Lutherville. I think really advocating to the local jurisdictions that this needs to be a priority and this needs to be a focus. The level of partnerships that we have with our jurisdictions kind of varies. I'm sitting in Anne Arundel County right now, which has been a great partner. They've really stepped forward and really made TOD a priority. I think the more we can advocate to our jurisdictions and saying that this is important, we need to build around transit, we need to be able to realize these investments, the better it can be. And then with all of our projects, we will be having public meetings. We will be engaging the public, and so having great advocates there to support us is always appreciated.
Wonderful. Well, we will let you move on with your busy day. We so appreciate taking time.
My pleasure.
To spend with us today. I will be sure that we share the questions and comments in the chat with you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate everybody's engagement. Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to introduce Todd Lang. Todd Lang is the Director of Transportation Planning with the Baltimore Metropolitan Council. His presentation is titled Update on Federal Transportation Funding Outlook, and as a mini summary, Todd Lang, Staff Director to the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board, or BRTB, will give an update on the status of reauthorization of the Federal Surface Transportation Program with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, set to expire on September 30th, 2026. Welcome, Todd. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Robin. Listen, I appreciate the invite. It's great to see so many familiar faces, so many familiar names. I get the unenviable task of trying to describe what Congress is and isn't doing regarding federal transportation funding. So I'm going to try to do my best, but there are, paid experts that do this. I'm going to be relying on a lot of the associations that we're members of to try to distill down what is happening and what isn't happening in Washington. I was thinking about putting out some Schoolhouse Rock type of things, trying to get back to the basics, but Congress really isn't doing things based upon how Schoolhouse Rock taught us how bills go through Congress. So here it goes, and I will try to answer any questions as we get through the process. So again, my task is to try to talk to you about federal transportation funding and what the outlook is moving forward. The way we do this is using different language. The language of federal transportation law, as we go through the updates of these processes, it's really known as reauthorization. So that's the state of art term that I'm going to be using as we start talking about the new updates to federal transportation law and funding. So let's go through a 101. I'm going to rely on our partners at the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations who've done somewhat of a, as I said, distillation of what this means and how this process goes. So reauthorization is the process by which transportation funding and policy are authorized. It's been going on a fairly regular basis every 5 to 6 years. And as Robin had mentioned, the current bill is going to expire at the end of this fiscal year, which is September 30th of 2026. So we are 2 months out from the expiration of the current federal transportation law. The federal transportation program is funded through a highway trust fund, very similar to the state of Maryland. Now, remember that the federal gas tax is 18.4 cents, and it was last updated in 1993 under President Clinton. So again, it's a fairly different funding structure than we have in the state of Maryland that's backed up by a lot of other items. Every time they go through this process, there is a requirement to basically back fund through the general funding program to make up the dollars to get through these different programs. And then this bottom line talks about how complicated it is to actually get through this process. There are different committees that have different jurisdictions in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. So on the House side, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee is the one that writes up the policy for the entire bill. So that's kind of the leading edge of how we get through that process of actually seeing a new bill and new federal transportation authorization. But then the Ways and Means Committee is the one that actually needs to come up with the funding to back up what the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee wants to do. And then there's smaller committees like the Science Committee that do things such as the research grants that fund things like Transportation Research Board and the different federal programs on that side. As we move over to the Senate, there is somewhat of a parallel program, but it is even more fragmented. The Environmental and Public Works Committee is the one that writes up the highway portion of the bill. The Banking Committee is the one that writes up the transit portion of the bill. And then the Commerce Committee comes in and fills in the rest with things like research and safety. So again, all of these committees need to basically sign off on a reauthorization program to get to the final passage of a program. And it's very complicated. Each of these committees have other things that they're doing. But House T&I and Senate Environmental Public Works are the leading edge of this reauthorization program. So here's just a quick history. So again, the Federal Highway Program is about 110 years old now as we go through the program. It kind of ran, through the federal highway system. But then there started to become kind of more policy changes and more regular reauthorizations as we started going through the 70s and the 80s. And, the bills starting with basically 1991 with everyone has an acronym for these bills. So ICE-T and then T21 and then Safety Lou. Each one of these, has a long, complicated name behind it, but basically every chairperson has to have their name attached to these different types of bills. But this kind of shows you that starting with 1998 in the T21 program, then 7 years later, we had another bill. About 7 years later, we had another bill. Then we had a shorter period for another program. And we had been running about $40 to $50 billion per year up until this last bill. The IIJA basically really accelerated the amount of federal transportation funding up to about $110 billion per year. So a huge investment in transportation. We would like to see that continued, but of course there are a lot of other competing interests regarding funding at the congressional level, and you see just kind of the challenge to get any bill through Congress at this point. So let's talk about this bill that we're currently under for the next 2 months and for the past couple of years, and how it really changed how the game is played in terms of federal transportation funding. So again, it was a huge influx of money, $567 billion investment over a 5-year period. What this did was it really changed the makeup of that transportation funding. Normally, we have formula funds, which are funds that go to states and to transit agencies and to regions, and they're pots of money that Congress says you can spend this money on these types of projects. That's what formula funding is, and that's been the tradition of federal transportation funding for basically the last 50, 60 years. When we went to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there was actually a split, and there was a huge influx in terms of discretionary funding. So this was a lot of competitive grant programs. Basically 24% of the money, up to $28 billion per year, suddenly became competitive grant programs. This changed the game. Locals and regions became much more eligible for these types of funding. We have many new players in the federal transportation program because of this. And then the question moving forward is this change in the way federal transportation funding going to continue, or are we going to move back to the formula program that is currently being talked about at the federal level? So there's actually been movement on the federal transportation program. I know we only have 2 months left, but the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee actually released a joint bill by the chair and the ranking member. So again, bipartisan bill known as the Build America 250 Act back in May. And that was actually approved by that subcommittee, or that committee, 62-2. So again, we don't think of many things being bipartisan happening in Washington right now, but this bill actually is a bipartisan bill, and at least it is a marker so that we can start talking about what reauthorization looks like and what is in that bill. So again, the latest IIJA expires here in 2 months. The current bill IIJA was $567 billion. This is $580 billion. So it continues that increased investment in federal transportation funding with just a very small increase, 4% overall increase from the IIJA. Again, the Highway Trust Fund would cover about $474 billion of that. But again, we're going to need about $107 billion from the general fund to cover the entire portion of that program. That $107 billion, again, is competing against many other programs that are asking for funding right now in Congress. I talked about the structural change that went into the IIJA that kind of moved from formula funding into discretionary funding. Well, what this does is it kind of walks that back. This is moving back to funding programs through the formula program and really taking away a lot of the competitive programs that were developed as part of the IIJA. So what are some of the specific programs in the Build America 250 program? So on the highway side, it continues the traditional formula programs, the National Highway Performance, Surface Transportation Block Group Program, Highway Safety, also MPO planning funding that funds our organization here. Those are continuing basically at an increase of 2% every single year and are kind of staying to be the kind of mainstay of federal transportation funding. There's a huge proposed investment in bridges, $9 billion in annual bridge funding, up from $5.4 billion annually. So again, and what this does is it also allows for 25% of that money that is reserved for locally owned bridges. So again, not on state or federal programs, but then locally owned bridges. There are some changes in discretionary programs. There would be a new Surface Transportation Accelerator grant. This is about $12 billion over the 5-year program. And what this does is it is designed for really local governments to compete for these infrastructure needs outside of the major state areas. Then we start getting into some of the areas that really aren't we're really starting to see some backsliding in terms of some of the investment from IIJA. Specifically, this comes from our American Public Transportation Association and their reading of the new proposed Build America 250. What Build America does in terms of public transit, it authorizes about $103 billion throughout the life of the bill, with 87 of that being guaranteed. This is down from the $119 or $120 billion that is from the IIJA. Again, 101 guaranteed as part of that program. So it really cuts the investment by about 14% over 5 years compared to what was in the IIJA. The program that really gets hit is passenger rail. Again, IIJA had a fairly robust passenger rail program, up to about $71 billion in terms of guaranteed funding, but $113 billion over the life of the program. That really gets scaled back to $64.3 billion, but no guaranteed funding as part of that program. It's really a 43% cut. So you're starting to hear from the different constituents that even though this passed on a bipartisan basis, they would like to see changes, especially as the Senate is going through their process. So where are we? Again, September 30th is the date that we really need something to happen. Finally, the House passed this, came out with this bill. It went through the committee. It was approved on May 22nd. Again, there still needs to be work done on the House side. They need to come up with funding through the Ways and Means Committee, and then ultimately needs to go through the entire House to pass this bill. The Senate has been working on text, but they have not released it. And again, it's those 3 different committees: Environmental Public Works, Commerce, and Banking. All of them need to ultimately release some text, come together, and ultimately fund a program. This isn't going to happen by September 30th. And it's not unusual for extensions to happen, but this one is pretty much has to happen at this point. And then the question would be, if we extend the IIJA, what level of funding is it going to be? And is it just for the formula programs? Does it basically not include the discretionary programs? And how long is it ultimately going to take to get through? And with uncertainties in terms of what the next Congress looks like, how do we get to a new bill? So what does this mean for the state of Maryland? This is really generalized. We could get into more specifics about specific programs and those types of things. But if you look, here is the basic table from the Consolidated Transportation Program at Maryland, and it has a line item for federal aid. And if you look at that, you'll see the big areas where federal aid comes into our transportation program are really from the Maryland Transit Administration and our State Highway Administration. The big funding mechanism for state highway is federal aid, and then MTA again is about 40%. So again, federal transportation funding is very important to what we do here in Maryland and to our transportation agencies. And we really need Congress to come together and pass a bill so that we have some certainty moving forward with our major projects. I'm trying to leave at least a couple of minutes for questions, and hopefully I did that, Robin. I'm certainly available.
You did. Thank you. And may I say, you have this amazing ability to convey very complex information and very detailed information in a clear and concise way to those of us that are trying to continually understand, the ever-changing transportation funding landscape. So thank you for that, and obviously for being with us today. I'd like to open up. I'd like to invite everyone to, ask a question, provide a comment, give Todd feedback. I'd like to start with, Todd, there's been recent articles in the New York Times and other publications that are really focused on the state of transportation funding, really across the country, and that, 2027 is going to be a very challenging year in terms of the projects that, particularly in Maryland, we want to implement and bring to fruition, and then, how do you fund it? So Transit Choices has been advocating for a very long time that we must find, dedicated sources of revenue to provide, expanded and sustainable transportation projects. Do you have any comment, or you can provide any insight on that particular point?
Sure, I can give it a shot. This has been a big topic here at the regional level as we go through the discussion about trying to fund state of good repair for the Maryland Transit Administration and for some of the new projects that are being proposed. Over the past couple of years, our organization and then, with our work through the Regional Transit Commission, there's been a lot of discussion about not only governance, but then also funding. So we've gone through a number of different studies trying to look at what are potential funding mechanisms that either occur in other regions or other states, or that could be, partitioned out for transportation here to try to generate additional revenues. And there's upsides and downsides to all of these different types of funding sources, whether or not it's traditional transportation funding with things like gas tax or registration fees or those types of items, or we start going into other funding mechanisms, the sales taxes, cannabis tax, those different types of items. It really needs to be tailored to what you want to do. I think Don had a presentation from our organization a couple of months ago at Transit Choices that it really needs to be a stable funding source. And it really, to make sure that when you're planning these major projects, that the revenue doesn't, fluctuate year to year, and it can be a solid foundation. So I think going into this next General Assembly session, definitely going to be part of the conversation, whether or not statewide or if we start talking about other geographic basis for these types of funding. I think it's going to be a big topic moving forward.
Thank you. Yes, we agree. I'm looking at, do we have any other questions or comments for Todd?
Good, because I don't know if I can answer about Congress.
Well, it's a complicated conversation. There are many moving parts, and you've got every jurisdiction fighting for their respective projects, and adjacent funding. So it's sort of, how do we come together, and how do we affect change, and how do we achieve success? Jimmy, did you have a question for Todd?
I'm sorry. So we have this new core commission being established for our region in Baltimore. what role can they play in this funding discussion? What role do you see that they will play in the funding discussion?
Wow. So, I see our former chair of the BRTC is on here, and I know that they played a big role in terms of the funding conversation regarding MTA and state of good repair. And, I hope and I think that the emphasis behind some of these boards that were being developed is to give an outside voice to be an advocate for transportation funding. And I hope that they play that role. Again, that's going to be, fund or staffed through MTA and appointed, through the governor through this program. But, it again is that outside voice trying to make sure that there's enough funding to, not only keep MTA in a good state of good repair, but then also to hopefully expand the system to everything we want it to be.
So do you see them making specific recommendations about where funding could come from?
I wish I could say I know, Jimmy, but this is a whole new animal, and it's not necessarily in our program. But if I were advocating, definitely I would like to see them play that role of starting to try to help figure out how we get this funding to a place where it needs to be.
So we're talking about $2.1 billion to move the Be More bus plan and the new idea for a red line being bus rapid transit. Together, those two projects would cost $2.1 billion. How do we get that money?
That's Well, and hopefully what I just showed you is that we're hoping that the federal government doesn't backslide to previous investment amounts. And that's what is some of the concerning language that's going on right now with the extension of the IIJA, is that they wouldn't fund it up to the current levels. And there are a lot of associations and agencies and states that are imploring Congress to at least continue the current federal transportation funding levels. If that doesn't happen, then we have even a bigger hole to climb ourselves out of. So I think it's important, that the current funding mechanisms stay as they are, or at least increase small portions, and then trying to figure out the new dollar amounts. Like we said, you've got to figure out some new stable funding sources that will match the type of investment that we need. And is that done through current mechanisms, or do we start reaching out to other types of funding that we haven't tapped yet?
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Robin.
No. Sorry. Please finish.
So in this next legislative session, obviously, if we're pushing for this $2.1 billion, is there any way that money can come out of the state budget, given the strict constraints on that budget already?
Wow, now we're completely out of my wheelhouse, Jimmy. But no, I mean, this year, everything we've heard, it's going to be a challenging year regarding the budget. And so that's why I'm saying that trying to find it out of the current budget is going to be very challenging. I think the discussion needs to start going into, other areas and other new potential revenue sources, and how are those generated, at what level, what sources. It's going to be a complicated conversation, and I ask all of you as advocates to be at the table and start working with us to try to see how we can fund transportation in the state of Maryland.
Well, you can count Transit Choices in. We are, we're always, we're ready. We are developing our strategy for 2027. And obviously that's going to include, the many partnerships and collaborative relationships, really across all agencies to make that happen. So Todd, thank you so much again for sharing part of your day with us, and also your excellent presentation. I'd like to now invite Jimmy Rouse, Transit Choices co-founder, to provide closing remarks.
So I think we heard two very interesting and detailed presentations today that go over our heads in a lot of ways. But it's fascinating to hear how the whole question of TOD gets developed and how we begin to address the funding issues, which are fundamental to our desire to improve public transit in our region. We have to be involved in this discussion of funding and how funding is going to be available for these projects, which means we need to be working in the legislature, and we need all of you who are on board listening to these conversations. We're going to need your support, and it's just it's a wide open time given the federal government unpredictability, and it's important that we all participate. So I really thank everybody who tunes into these meetings, because you're the ones who make it possible for us to have these meetings and these discussions, which will lead us towards an agenda of how we move forward. So thank you all for participating. And thank you, Todd and David, for such excellent presentations.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you, Jimmy. I echo your comments completely. And, I would like everyone to stay tuned for our next meeting announcement. We appreciate your participation. If you have any questions or comments that you think of after this meeting, please email me and I'll be happy to do my best to get you the responses that you're looking for. Until then, have a wonderful day, and thank you again for joining us. Take care.